Welcome to Midweek Mysteries, and thank you for being here. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I'd like to start the show by saying a huge thank you to our wonderful patrons. Your support and generosity is truly amazing, and it makes our podcast possible. As always, we enjoy giving a personal shout-out to all of our supporters at the beginning of our full-length episodes every Sunday, so if you're a patron, be sure to tune in. Today's first midweek mystery comes to us from Dallin. Dallin's story is called Shadow Santa. Dallin says, "Hello, Nick. I have really enjoyed listening to your podcast over the last few months. The story I have to share comes from something that happened when I was about 10 or 11 years old. We were getting close to Christmas time, and I remember how excited I was for the holiday to arrive. One night, however, I did my normal nightly routine and got myself ready for bed. I fell asleep, and a couple hours later, I woke up to the feeling of being watched. I sat up and realized that my door was slightly cracked open, which is bizarre because I always had my door shut when I sleep, because my door led to a big empty hallway I didn't like to have staring at me while I slept. I got out of bed and started walking over to my door to close it, when I realized that there truly was a figure standing in my doorway watching me. It was about 6.5 feet tall and had a large, broad appearance. Confused and also terrified, I stared at it for a few seconds to make sure I wasn't seeing things. My first thought after my terror washed away was that it was Santa Claus. Yes, I believed in Santa still at this time. I mean, after all, he does watch over you to make sure you're being nice and not naughty. So I started walking closer to it, and as soon as I reached the door, the figure backed away. I opened my door to see the figure at the end of the hallway. After standing there for a few seconds, he started sprinting toward me with his hands stretched out, as if he was going to tackle me as soon as he reached me. I screamed and grabbed a shoe that was by my bed and threw it in the direction of the figure. My parents heard me screaming and turned all the lights on, and just like that, the figure was gone. My father asked what was wrong, and so I relayed my experience to him. He told me everything was fine and to go back to bed. Still terrified, I climbed back into my sheets and stared at my closed door until my eyes grew heavy enough that I fell asleep. When I woke up, I had convinced myself that it was a dream, but when I opened the door again, I saw the shoe that I had thrown sitting right against my door. I didn't see where I threw it the night before, but I know it was farther than where it was sitting currently. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I suddenly felt as though I was being watched again. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. I asked them if they put my shoe against my door, and they said they had no idea where my shoe even was. I am an only child with no pets. I told my parents what happened, and they told me that I must have been sleepwalking. However, I have never had a history of sleepwalking, ever. I know what I saw that night, and the memory of it still haunts me to this day. Thanks for your podcast, and keep up the great work. I look forward to your next one. Dallin. Our next midweek mystery comes from Ronnie. Ronnie's story is called UFO Encounters in Scotland. Ronnie says, "Hi, I love your show. I've been binging on it during the lockdown. It has caused me to write down many events from my life and reassess them. On speaking to my sister to get her permission for this submission, we realized that we have had many encounters with the paranormal. It starts with my dad before my sister and I were born, and my dad spent several years service in the Royal Air Force. During that time, he was stationed in the remote far north of Scotland. He was a fireman, and most of the emergencies they responded to were crashes, etc. He would teasingly hint at having seen UFOs, and them being present at these serious crashes. One in particular in 1967. When several airmen died in an accident. Not that UFOs had caused the accidents, but almost that they were being observed. This particular crash really stayed with him. He was only 18, and it would turn out to be the worst he had attended, for loss of life, and he knew some of the men. He, as a young aircraft man, would sometimes look after the children of senior officers on the base, and he knew 2 of the men on board well, and I remember being taken to visit their graves. But when it came to UFOs, he would always stop short and say he couldn't tell us more, as he had signed the official Secrets Act. It was all very exciting, as he was quite the storyteller, and we would hang on every word. One story he did tell us about happened when we were little. He was a truck driver by then, having left the Royal Air Force. He was delivering all over Scotland, and one lovely summer's day, he stopped in a remote area to have his lunch. It was a beautiful cliff top overlooking the sea. The sky was clear, and there was no one around. As he sat there enjoying his sandwiches, he saw something silver appear from one horizon and travel to the other incredibly quick. It was something moving more quickly than this man that has lived on an Air Force base had ever seen anything travel before. It actually spooked him. He thought, what in the name of all that is holy was that? And then, as quickly as it disappeared, it was back, hanging in the air towards the horizon. He got back in his truck straight away and headed off to his next destination, a little shaken. As he went along, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen, and decided it was not man-made. It was no prototype he had ever seen or heard of, and he had always maintained a keen interest in aviation. Traveling through this deserted rural area, he started to hear a whirling sound. Being in the middle of nowhere, he knew that any mechanical problem could be a pretty big deal. He stopped, but the noise continued. He checked the mirrors and looked around, but there was nothing. No one around, in a pine-lined road in rural Scotland. Very odd. With his hand on the cab door, he checked his window mirror again and saw a tall figure moving quickly up the side of his truck. He started the engine and took off at full speed. It shocked him. It really did. He was still shaken when he got home. The biggest animal in the wilds of Scotland that you'll find is a stag, but he said it had definitely been humanoid and with a weird gait. The second half of my story is about an experience my sister and I had. We lived in a small town called East Kilbride. Those of your listeners interested in UFOs should look the town up, as it has had a lot of sightings. My sister was home from university for Christmas, and we decided to go visit a mutual friend across town. As we were going to have a drink, we walked on the clear, frosty night. We stayed a few hours and then headed off. We stopped off to pick up some food to take home, and due to this slight detour, we walked home a way we usually avoid, up a steep grassy hill, and then along the side of a quiet road. This part of town is very quiet, and with great expanses of sky. In the daylight, you can see north toward Ben Lomond and Trossachs National Park. Over the years, I have seen several shooting stars here, and as a child, we watched a space shuttle fly over the town as a thank you for the work that was done in a local factory, which contributed to the craft in some way. My sister, now a full-fledged scientist, has always been keen on astronomy. The sky was clear on this frosty evening, and there were many stars out. Looking up, I remarked to my sister, "Is that Venus?" as I could see a very bright star. Looking up, she casually remarked, "No, it's in the wrong place." And as we trudged on, trying to get home in the cold, she looked up again and said, "Actually, what is that?" So we stopped and looked at it. It was very bright, a different kind of light than a star or planet. As we looked at it, and looked at each other in turn, it moved. "It's moving. A helicopter?" I said, really staring now because it seemed to rotate or shift shape. It was clearly now a triangle with a very bright light on each corner. It was slowly rotating. Now I am always very impressed with people that can tell how big something is, people that can calculate scale. Against this ink-black, star-sprinkled winter sky, it was going to be difficult to work out anything like that. But as it seemed to be getting closer, all I can say is that I was struck by its density, and that made it appear massive. We were standing in shock, trying to desperately use logic to work out what this was. We kept walking, not wanting to make a strange situation worse. It was still slowly rotating when from one of the corners another light emerged. It flew out from the corner, but not too far, then another and another, until there were around 8 emerging from all 3 corners. And then it became clear that these lights were also triangles, with a light at each corner. Size-wise, each of them were about 1/50th the size of the original object. There was no noise, and the only thing I could hear was our breathing. The smaller objects were all flying around the bigger object, going a bit away, then returning to fly around the larger object. We realized we were following them. Eyes skyward, we were walking towards an even more secluded area. We gave ourselves a shake, realizing we were less than 5 minutes from home, and that Dad was home. Maybe we could take him out and show him. We hurried home, all overwhelmed by what we saw. We realized we could still see the objects all the way home, maybe a sign of the altitude they were at. We got in and ran to our dad, telling him all about it. He went into the sitting room, and turning out the light, he peered out the window. The lights were still clearly visible, with the smaller triangles around the large, dense object. He then went into our garden to get a better look. Excited, we looked at our dad, wondering what he'd do. He looked at us, walked back in, shut and locked the door, walked into the living room, and shut the blinds. He said, "Best we just leave that alone. Best not to chase these things." And then, unbelievably, cold, scared, excited, and in reverence to our dad, we just left it and settled down to eat. We have spoken of it many times, but why didn't we report it? Why did Dad react like that? What was it? My dad has passed on now, so we can't ask him. But I know at that time, we saw how serious he thought it was, that this man that had hinted about seeing or being around strange goings-on, and of course the earlier event I described, we just thought that if he didn't want to know, then neither did we. People may think that it sounds like drones, but they were bigger than any drone I have ever seen, and this was either 1999 or 1998. I have more stories I can share. I am particularly interested in the Hat Man. I'd never heard of him before. However, I have many experiences of him. Thanks, Ronnie. As we come to the end of this edition of Midweek Mysteries, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the podcast, and a special thank you to Dahlin and Ronnie for writing in and sharing their experiences with all of us. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy rest of the week, and we'll see you back here on Sunday for our next episode. If you or someone that you know has witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember, no matter how insignificant or outlandish you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. You can also connect with us by joining our forum and by following us on social media. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your friends. If you're interested in taking the next step and becoming a patron, you can visit patreon.com/paranormal mysteries. Benefits include ad-free episodes and early access to select shows. New episodes of the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast are produced every Sunday, with a new Midweek Mysteries airing every Wednesday, and they're available on all of your favorite podcast apps. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, thank you so much for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.